have to be very brave to stand up and talk about all those terrible things that have happened to you. Anyway, I can only hope.
The air inside Buckingham Palace was thick with tension. Behind the grand gilded doors where tradition reigned supreme, an unexpected storm was brewing, one that no amount of royal decorum could contain. Queen Camilla, a woman who had withstood decades of scrutiny, betrayal, and relentless public judgment, was now standing at the center of a crisis so deep, so personal, that it left her in tears. The whispers had started long before this moment. At royal banquets, during hushed conversations in the halls of Sandringham, and even in the carefully managed social circles of the aristocracy, there was always something simmering beneath the surface. The relationship between Camilla and Carole Middleton had never been one of warmth, but for years they had played their roles well. Smiles were exchanged in public, polite nods during royal engagements, and the occasional pleasantries for the cameras. To the untrained eye, they seemed civil, perhaps even friendly. But behind those formal courtesies, an unspoken battle had been waged, one of power, influence, and silent retribution. Carole Middleton was no stranger to the weight of the monarchy's expectations. She had spent years learning the delicate dance of royal politics, ensuring that her daughter Kate fit seamlessly into a world that had long resisted outsiders. But she had never been fully welcomed. Despite Kate's status as the future queen, the Middletons remained on the periphery, tolerated but never truly embraced. And at the heart of this exclusion stood one figure, Queen Camilla. Camilla, born into privilege, understood the rules of royal hierarchy better than anyone. She had fought her own battles and endured decades of scandal to claim her place beside King Charles. But to her, lineage mattered, status mattered. The idea that a woman like Carole, a self-made businesswoman, a commoner, could have any real influence over the monarchy was in her eyes unacceptable. And so, the divide between them deepened, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Invitations that never arrived, decisions made without consultation, whispered remarks that stung with quiet condescension. For years, Carole endured it all. She watched as her access to Kate was carefully controlled, and saw how decisions about her daughter's life were shaped by forces beyond her reach. Christmases that should have been spent as a family were instead dictated by royal protocol. Even the birth of her grandchildren, moments that should have brought them closer, only served to highlight the divide. Royal tradition ensured that Carole was an outsider in their upbringing, a spectator rather than a participant. But now, the facade had crumbled. The breaking point came swiftly, without warning. No more silent exclusion, no more carefully crafted distance. Carole Middleton had made a decision that shattered the carefully maintained equilibrium within the palace walls, and Queen Camilla, a woman who had weathered every imaginable storm, was left visibly shaken. The details were not yet fully known to the public, but the impact was undeniable. Something had shifted, something irrevocable. Inside Buckingham Palace, aides rushed from room to room, whispers turning to urgent conversations, phones ringing incessantly as damage control efforts began. But nothing could change what had already been set into motion. Outside, the press caught wind of the unrest. Headlines speculated, royal experts dissected every possible angle, the public divided in their loyalties. The monarchy had survived countless scandals before, but this one felt different. This one was personal, and as Queen Camilla sat, absorbing the weight of what had just unfolded, one question hung in the air, unanswered and unavoidable. What had Carole Middleton done to leave her in tears? Before Kate Middleton ever walked through the doors of Buckingham Palace as a royal, her mother Carole had already felt the cold sting of rejection. The aristocratic world had rules strict, unspoken, and unwavering. And for someone like Carole Middleton, a self-made businesswoman with no noble lineage, the message was clear: she did not belong. For Queen Camilla, the tradition was not just a concept, it was the foundation upon which the monarchy stood. She had spent decades fighting for her place beside King Charles, enduring scrutiny, scandal, and whispers behind closed doors. She knew better than anyone that acceptance in royal circles was never freely given, it had to be earned, sometimes at great personal cost. And, to her, Carole Middleton had not earned it. The tension between them at first was subtle, an unspoken rivalry concealed behind public smiles and courteous small talk. But those who knew the palace well could see the cracks forming. When Prince William and Kate announced their engagement in 2010, those cracks deepened. The wedding was not just a royal event, it was a battle over influence. Carole had spent years shaping Kate's future, ensuring she was prepared for the life that awaited her. But inside the palace walls, her presence was barely tolerated. She had ideas for the wedding, personal touches that reflected Kate's upbringing and family traditions that would make the day truly theirs. But time and again, her suggestions were dismissed. The guest list? Controlled by royal aides. The floral arrangements? Overridden by tradition. Even the smallest details, like where the Middletons would be seated, became a source of quiet tension. Carole found herself excluded from decisions, pushed to the background, while Camilla stood firmly at the heart of royal planning. It was not about flowers or seating charts, it was about power, and Carole was quickly realizing how little of it she had. To Camilla, the rules of the monarchy were sacred. Carole, on the other hand, had spent her life bending the rules to build something of her own. She had raised her daughter to be independent, strong, and capable of standing on her own. But in the world of royalty, independence was a threat. And as the wedding approached, the divide between them grew more pronounced. Carole was used to being the woman who made things happen. She had built her business from nothing, navigated the complexities of high society, and ensured that her daughter was prepared for a life in the royal spotlight. But now she was being treated as an outsider, a reminder that no matter how far she had come, she would never be one of them. And Camilla made sure she knew it. Even after the wedding, the shift was undeniable. Carole's access to Kate was restricted. Time with her daughter was now dictated by royal obligations. Family traditions were quietly erased, replaced by centuries-old protocols. It wasn't just about keeping Carole at a distance, it was about control. But Carole Middleton had never been one to back down. She watched, she waited, and she learned. Because the battle for influence had only just begun. Carole Middleton had spent years playing by the rules, staying quiet, staying composed, staying in her place. She had smiled through the subtle exclusions, endured the whispered remarks, and accepted the reality that no matter how much her daughter meant to the monarchy, she would always be seen as an outsider. But patience has its limits, and Carole's had finally run out. At first, she had convinced herself that the treatment she received from the royal family was nothing personal. She wasn't born into nobility. She hadn't been raised in aristocratic circles. Perhaps this was just how things worked. Tradition over modernity, bloodlines over merit. But the more she watched, the clearer it became. This was not just tradition. This was control. She saw it in the way Kate's time was carefully managed, every hour accounted for, every move dictated by royal obligations. She saw it in the way decisions were made without her input, without consideration for Kate's own family. Holidays that should have been spent together were stripped away. Private family moments were overshadowed by royal duties. And worst of all, she saw the toll it took on her daughter. Kate had been raised to be strong. She had been taught resilience, independence, and the value of family. But the Kate that Carole saw now was different. The pressure of balancing her loyalty to her family and her duty to the crown was wearing on her. She remained poised in public, always graceful, always smiling. But behind closed doors, the cracks were beginning to show. The final blow came suddenly, without warning. An upcoming royal event, one that should have included the Middletons as a sign of unity, was quietly changed at the last moment. Invitations were withdrawn, seating arrangements were altered, and once again, Carole found herself on the outside looking in. The message was clear: they were not welcome, and this time the decision had come from one person alone. Queen Camilla. For years, Camilla had tolerated Carole's presence. Now she was making it known that there were limits to that tolerance. But what she didn't realize was that she had just pushed Carole Middleton past hers. This was no longer about silent endurance. This was no longer about playing by their rules. Carole had spent too much time in the shadows, too much time allowing the palace to dictate the terms. Now, she was ready to take back control. And as she made that decision, one thing became clear. The royal family had underestimated her, because Carole Middleton was done being silent, and no one expected just how far she would go to expose the truth. The palace had seen scandals before, affairs, betrayals, and secrets whispered through the marble halls of Buckingham Palace, but nothing like this. Nothing that threatened the very foundation of the monarchy itself. Carole Middleton had been dismissed for years. An outsider, a commoner, a woman who had been made to feel like she would never truly belong. But she had waited, she had watched, and now she had something they couldn't ignore. On a quiet morning, she walked through the palace gates, not as a guest, not as the mother of the future queen, but as a woman with a mission. Those who saw her pass had no idea what was coming. No one did. But within minutes, Buckingham Palace would be shaken to its core. Inside the grand halls, the air was still, thick with an unspoken tension. Camilla sat poised, confident, and accustomed to winning battles fought behind closed doors. She had seen Carole as a nuisance, a woman who didn't understand how things worked in royal circles. But as Carole took her place before the gathered officials, she wasn't the one who looked out of place. Camilla was. Then, the bombshell dropped. Carole didn't just accuse Camilla of hidden financial dealings, she laid out a case so devastating that even the most loyal aides in the room couldn't ignore it. Bank records, transaction histories, names of offshore accounts. The evidence was meticulous and undeniable. She spoke of money discreetly transferred, hidden in networks of shell companies and tax-free havens. The monarchy had spent centuries carefully crafting an image of integrity, of duty, but now, that image was at risk of crumbling in an instant. Camilla sat frozen. For the first time, she wasn't in control. The weight of the accusations settled over her like a crushing force. Her breath shallow, her expression betraying the fear that had taken hold. She had weathered storms before, but this was something else entirely. No one in the room spoke. The silence stretched, thick with implications too dangerous to voice. Because if Carole's claims were true, this wasn't just a royal scandal. This wasn't just about a rivalry between two women. This was treason against the institution itself. And as Carole Middleton stood, unwavering, before the stunned faces of Buckingham Palace, one thing became clear: the monarchy would never be the same again. Buckingham Palace was built to withstand centuries of storms. Scandals came and went, controversies faded with time. The institution had always survived, but this was different. The moment Carole Middleton's accusations hit the airwaves, the very foundation of the monarchy trembled, and for the first time in modern history, the palace had no clear way out. Panic spread like wildfire behind the palace gates. A crisis of this scale required immediate containment, but there was no blueprint for what to do when a private citizen, an outsider, was the one who had forced the monarchy into a corner. Secret meetings were called, pulling in the most powerful royal advisors, damage control experts, and legal minds. The palace phones rang relentlessly, urgent voices whispering into receivers, desperate for a strategy. But no amount of carefully crafted statements could undo what had already begun. The press had latched onto the story, dissecting every detail, every claim. Journalists camped outside Buckingham Palace, their cameras pointed at the grand entrance, waiting for a response that wasn't coming. Headlines screamed of betrayal, corruption, and a monarchy on the brink of collapse. And then there was social media. The storm online was unlike anything the palace had ever faced. For years, the royal family had been untouchable, protected by layers of tradition and control. But now, the internet has turned the scandal into a war. Half the public praised Carole Middleton, hailing her as a fearless woman who had dared to challenge a centuries-old institution. "The truth must come out," they wrote. "She's standing up for Kate. She's standing up for all of us." But others stood fiercely by Queen Camilla, convinced that Carole's accusations were nothing more than an act of revenge. "This is an attack on the monarchy. She's trying to destroy the royal family from within." The divide deepened with every passing hour. Hashtags trended worldwide. The monarchy, which had thrived on secrecy, now faced a force that couldn't control public scrutiny, and inside the palace, the pressure was unbearable. Camilla had retreated from public view. King Charles, torn between loyalty to his wife and duty to the crown, was caught in a silent storm. Prince William, the future king, knew that every decision made in the coming days would shape the very monarchy he was destined to inherit. The institution was crumbling under the weight of its silence, and just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, another shocking twist emerged. For decades, Camilla had fought for acceptance. She had endured public hatred, brutal headlines, and relentless comparisons to the woman she could never replace. But through it all, she had survived. She had risen from the shadows, walked through the fire, and emerged as queen. Until now, the scandal changed everything. The accusations weren't just whispers in the corridors of Buckingham Palace. They were out in the open, dissected by the press, amplified by social media, and scrutinized by the public. And this time, Camilla found herself in a position she had never faced before: powerless. The fallout was immediate. The carefully curated goodwill she had built over the years disintegrated overnight. Charity events, once eager to host her, suddenly postponed indefinitely. Longtime supporters of her initiatives withdrew their funding, their silence speaking louder than words. Royal allies, those who had once stood by her side, began to distance themselves, wary of the storm brewing around her. And then came the investigations. Government officials demanded transparency. Financial experts pored over every detail of the allegations, combing through records, tracking transactions, searching for anything that could confirm or deny what Carole Middleton had exposed. For the first time, Camilla's private affairs were no longer her own. The monarchy had survived countless scandals before, but this wasn't just a personal crisis, this was a direct challenge to the institution itself. Inside the palace, Camilla's isolation deepened. The halls, that had once been filled with advisors and confidants, now felt empty. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Longtime staff requested transfers. Even her most trusted aides hesitated before answering her calls. The invisible walls of royal power that had once protected her had turned into a prison. Then came the final blow. At the Buckingham Palace gift shop, where portraits of the royal family lined the shelves, something had changed. Her image, once displayed alongside King Charles, alongside the future of the monarchy, was gone. Quietly removed. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. And that was when she knew. This was not just a scandal, this was erasure. The woman who had fought for her place in history was watching it slip away. And as the world turned its gaze toward the future of the monarchy, one thing became painfully clear. Camilla's reign had begun to fade. And as she stood on the precipice of irrelevance, Kate Middleton was stepping into her rightful place. Kate Middleton had once been the girl they underestimated. The commoner had no place among royalty, the woman the press dismissed as too ordinary to wear a crown. But what they failed to see, what they had never anticipated, was that it was precisely her ordinariness that would make her extraordinary. For years, Kate had walked a fine line, balancing royal expectations with the values she had carried from childhood. The media scrutinized her every move, searching for flaws and waiting for missteps. The aristocracy whispered behind closed doors, questioning whether a woman with no noble blood could truly belong. But Kate never fought back with words. She didn't need to. She let her actions speak for themselves, and slowly something began to shift. While the old guard of the monarchy clung to outdated traditions, Kate redefined what it meant to be royal. She wasn't just fulfilling duties, she was reshaping them. Instead of distant formality, she brought warmth. Instead of rehearsed appearances, she connected. At charity events, she didn't just stand for photographs. She sat on the floor with children, listened to their stories and remembered their names. At hospitals, she didn't just cut ribbons. She spoke to exhausted nurses, comforted grieving families, and made people feel seen. The public noticed, and while Camilla's name became entangled in scandal, Kate's name became something else entirely: hope. She represented a monarchy that could evolve, one that could be more than just a relic of the past. And for the first time in years, people began to believe in the royal family again. Even inside Buckingham Palace, the change was undeniable. The influence that had once been reserved for Queen Camilla was slipping away. Royal advisors, politicians, and even foreign dignitaries, one by one, began turning to Kate instead. She was no longer just a duchess, no longer just a future queen. She was the monarchy's strongest pillar, and Carole Middleton, the woman who had once been dismissed as an outsider, was no longer kept at a distance. The very people who had ignored her were now forced to acknowledge what she had always known. Kate was not just prepared for this life, she was meant for it. But as the world embraced the rise of Kate Middleton, one question remained unanswered. What did this shift mean for the future of the British monarchy? The British monarchy has withstood wars, scandals, and shifting tides of public opinion. But now it stands at a crossroads, a defining moment that could shape its future for generations to come. The old ways, once unshakable, are no longer enough. The institution that prided itself on tradition now faces a question it can no longer ignore: evolve or crumble? Carole Middleton's actions forced an uncomfortable truth into the light. For years, the royal family had relied on carefully crafted illusions, on silence, on the expectation that loyalty would always outweigh scrutiny. But that illusion has shattered. The world has seen what lies behind the palace walls: the rivalries, the power struggles, the calculated exclusion of those deemed unworthy. And now, people are demanding answers. Queen Camilla, once untouchable, finds herself standing on uncertain ground. The allegations against her have cast a long shadow over the monarchy, one that even her most loyal supporters cannot ignore. But what comes next? Will she fight to reclaim her position, to salvage what remains of her legacy, or will she fade into the background, another casualty of a system that has always been built on survival of the fittest. And then there is Kate, the woman they once doubted, the commoner who was never supposed to belong, now stands as the monarchy's strongest hope. The public sees in her something they have longed for: authenticity, warmth, a leader who understands the world beyond royal gates. With each passing day, she becomes more than just a future queen. She becomes the symbol of what the monarchy could be. The choices made in the coming months will decide everything. Will the royal family cling to its past, risking irrelevance in a world that demands progress? Or will it embrace the change it has resisted for so long? One thing is certain: this is not just another royal scandal. This is a reckoning. And the monarchy, as the world has known it, will never be the same again. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.